Hello. In the first half of this video, I will cover techniques for prepping your marvelous designer garment for weight mapping in DAZ Studio. In the second half, I will discuss strategies for baking out normal and occlusion maps in Substance Painter, topics that apply to all software that can export meshes to Substance Painter. We are going to export 4 meshes, 2 designed to be used in DAZ and the other 2 in Substance Painter. The 2 main strategies for prepping a garment in Marvelous Designer are using the pattern shrinkage weft and warp properties and the steam tool. It is extremely important to remind you that any changes to the pattern itself, the adding of trim or internal lines or scaling, will change the polygons of the underlying mesh, so you want to finalize your garment before moving to this step. The goal here is to create a tight mesh that can be used for the transfer tool. The closer the vertices are to the base figure, the better the tool will transfer the weight maps. This significantly reduces your work in refining weight maps using the weight map tool. I am indebted to the series of videos created by Aisha that cover in great depth the process of rigging and morphing clothing. I will not be covering in depth these topics in this video, only considerations for prepping a mesh for this process. At this point, you should have finalized your pattern. Remember, once you start the transfer process to DAZ and weight mapping, you can't change any geometry. I'm going to demonstrate transferring the shirt. I'm going to delete the shorts for now. I'm going to double check my skin offset. And I'm going to go ahead and transfer the final version of the shirt. This is what I want the shirt to look like after we've done all the weight mapping. And for now, I'm going to send over a thin version of it. So now we're going to create a tightly fitted version of this shirt. These folds and the distance of the sleeve from the arm could prove troublesome when you go to use the transfer utility. So we're going to highlight the shirt. Since you can't change the pattern itself or the scale, there are 2 techniques you can use to bring the garment closer to the base figure in Marvelous Designer. The first is adjusting the shrinkage weft and shrinkage warp. So I'm going to change these to 80 and see how that looks. And the important thing about these 2 settings in the property editor is they do not change the underlying geometry. So that's the first step, and we still have some issues here. So I'm going to start using another technique to bring this closer to the body, and that is the steam tool. Normally you want to use the steam tool judiciously, but when you're creating this tight-fitting version of the garment, you can go to town using it, and that will bring the garment close to the body. But again, the great thing is it does not change the underlying geometry. If you grab the garment at any point, notice the corresponding area in the pattern shows up, and that shows you where you should add some additional steam. And again, here we want to add some more. And this provides you with the tight version of the garment that you can use for weight mapping. So I'm going to export this at this point, making sure I use the exact same settings that I used when exporting the final version. Now you can import the tight-fitting version of the garment into DAZ Studio. Use the transfer tool. And then you're going to have work to do, as you can see. So as you can see, you're going to have a number of issues that you will have to fix with the weight mapping tool. Covering that is out of scope for this video, but Aisha covers it in depth in her videos. And then you can, after you've done all your weight mapping, Then you can update the base geometry with the final version. So select Edit, Object, Geometry, Update Base Geometry, update the vertex position, and grab that final garment fit that you had. And then you'll be ready to continue on with working with your garment in DAZ. At this point, we're going to export the two meshes that are needed by Substance Painter. The first one is this thin mesh, and the second one is this thick mesh. These two meshes will provide the information needed to bake out the normal map and the occlusion map. One consideration for baking out the occlusion map is how much occlusion you want under the arm. Depending upon my artistic goals, sometimes I leave the avatar in the A-frame, but other times I will bring the avatar into the T-pose to minimize the amount of occlusion under the arm. But when you do that, you're going to, of course, need to readjust the mesh to get rid of any wrinkles that were created. The goal here is to try to keep the mesh as clean as possible. So I'm trying to get as few wrinkles as possible. Depending upon your artistic goals, you don't necessarily want to always bake in the folds and wrinkles that were in the base mesh, though there may be instances where you do in fact want to do that. So now I'm going to export two meshes for Substance Painter, one thin version and one thick version. So I'll do the thin first, and then I'll do the thick version. Now we will bake the maps in Substance Painter. So I am going to open up the thin version of the garment that we created, and notice there's no detailed geometry here. This is bad. I didn't notice that creeped in while I was saving the files. I'm not going to go back and fix it now, but you don't want anything like these types of artifacts in the document when you do the bake. Now I'm going to bake my mesh maps. I'm going to add my normal, and I'm going to pick the thick garment that I created for the high definition mesh so I can get back that detail. And here's an optional setting. This ground plane will create some additional occlusion at the bottom of any mesh. Sometimes you want to use that, for example, for grunge, and sometimes you don't want to. Sometimes you want to use it for grunge, sometimes you don't. It depends upon your artistic goals. So I'm going to go ahead and bake these maps. So now notice, even though we're using the thin version of the garment, we do have from the normal map all the thick detail that we had from the garment. And so if we look at our base mesh maps, we have the normal, and then we have the occlusion. And notice here at the bottom there's some additional occlusion. Again, it depends upon your goals. If, for example, you wanted to add a dirt map, notice how that will add some additional dirt. Notice how that will add some additional dirt at the bottom, because remember, this generator in Substance Painter relies heavily on the ambient occlusion map. So whatever is in that map is what you're going to get. But notice we got some nice occlusion and dirt under the arms. We got some additional dirt right along the seam. That concludes this video. I hope it gave you some good ideas on how to export meshes into other applications from Marvelous Designer.